So last week we were continuing with our special 500th, our series based around our 500th episode special. Last week we were at episode 183. We were in the history of television, part 2, the Vietnam era. We'll focus on the 70s. We had to pull out of Vietnam very quickly. It was the fall of Saigon in the fortress of ultimate darkness. But now we are back. We have hopefully an exit strategy for the next episode. This battle, this war on multiple fronts. We are in episode 184, the history of television, part 3, the Reagan era, which is a focus on these next. I mean, we did a bunch of back-to-back episodes. The part 3 and 4 of the history of television series, which was episodes 184 and 185, were focused on the 80s. And what we were talking about last time was just how we did this series. We would throw. It's kind of what we're doing now. What we're doing now is going back through the archives at Libsyn, and going through episode by episode and seeing what stirs certain emotions, what triggers certain memories, and revisiting those things. We did that with the history of TV, where we would go out. We had lists of episodes, and we would discuss, Cheers, the Cosby Show.
Yeah.
The Cosby Show now, so many years later.
Well, wait a minute. Did we?
Oh wait.
Had that dropped yet?
Well, we had already done the Weinstein, and so
see that's how rapidly all of this changed. I can't remember when the Bill Cosby thing became a
scandal.
Legal scandal. I mean, there's always been word about. There's always been some bullshit about Bill Cosby and his proclivities, but was it something that he was? What's that?
Bill Cosby came up in the Weinstein episode.
But I can't remember if Cosby was before Weinstein or Weinstein came after Cosby. I think Cosby came before Cosby. I can't remember though.
All I'm saying is that in 2017 when we did the Weinstein episode, which was episode 149, Bill Cosby was one of the people that we talked about then. So to what extent? That I'm not sure.
But I think the original thing was did Cosby's legal issues, were they news at the point where we were doing the episode about television in the 1980s?
Well, I guess what I'm trying to tell you is that Weinstein was in 2017. When we did this episode was in 2018.
Okay, so it must have
already had this. Yeah. I don't know how far into any kind of legal proceedings we had gotten by then. And I don't have any notes that I took on that separate from what I may have said this last time about Bill Cosby. I don't have any specific notes that I took on the TV episode in relation to Cosby, so that I'm not sure. So it's one of those where it's kind of like you're half relying on memory, you're half relying on, but the current look is what's informing the past, and so it's difficult. But it's kind of like one of those things where it's kind of like it's almost like you don't remember a time when you can't see that. But he had, the Hannibal Buress stuff had already been out since from years before. And so there was a documentary that had stuff out on him too. You know what I mean? Like, I think it was called like The Cosby Women Speak or something like that.
No, it was the Camus Bell thing. It was a Showtime. Yeah, it was the Cosby issue or dealing with Cosby or something. I can't remember what exactly it was. I remember watching. It was a Showtime. It was a Showtime documentary by Camus, W. Camus Bell, I believe. If we're talking about the same thing.
And so by the time the trial, I think the trial is going on at the same time that we're doing the episode, or it was around that same time.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know how far, like, I don't know exactly what we said about Bill Cosby, separate, like, I don't know the latest developments at that time, separate from what we would have already said in terms of the allegations against him. I don't know if there was anything definitive that had come out at that point beyond just the allegations.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. There was a trial, but I don't know if I don't know. And there's been stuff that's come out since, and it's a big fucking mess. And his conviction has since been, it was overturned.
Yeah, bad on legalities. Yeah.
So, like, but, you know, that's one of those things where it's like, this shit is ongoing. And so you think of, you know, just the other day we were talking about Bruce Willis and we were talking about Die Hard, and so then Moonlight came up. And that's one of those 80s shows. But now you think Moonlighting and you think, okay, Bruce Willis, and you think the state of Bruce Willis's health at this point. At that point, that wasn't an issue back in 2018 for at least that anyone would have known about. I don't know about if there were hints at it back then. I don't know. In terms of his personal life, we don't know his personal life, but yeah, like you throw out these, you know, Miami Vice.
Yeah.
You know, the A-Team.
Yeah, all these shows that were the fabric.
Webster,
yeah.
Right. They were the fabric that we grew up with, that your childhood is wrapped in these things and these different, and even then they're having, there are shows that are touching on certain issues that are dealing with culture, because it's a cultural, we were looking at the history of TV as kind of like connected to the fabric of the greater culture, not just necessarily random shows that were thrown on, which they were, but at the same time also these shows as reflections of their times, which is also obviously what they are. So to really look at 80s TV, but as Reagan era TV, and then to move on beyond that into episode 186 and 187, 186, 187, and 188, which is the 90s. And even though you may have, you know, things we think of like, okay, Married with Children, The Simpsons, these are 90s shows. These are things that started in the late 80s, so it blends, it bleeds,
yeah.
But they are clearly, you know, Fox, the Fox channel, and there's a certain kind of style. There's a certain kind of ethos that comes through. And so when you think of, you know, if you think of designing women, or you think of Golden or Murphy Brown or something, it's a different thing from when you think about, try to put yourself in the mind of like, okay, here in LA, Fox was Channel 11. I don't know what it is to any of the rest of you.
Yeah, it was 15 out here.
You from, you know, even from the U.S. But like to think of like, okay, Channel 11 on a Saturday at night is going to be Cops, and then it's going to be America's Most Wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Or at what day and at what point do you change the channel and then you hear fucking Sinatra singing Love and Marriage, and okay, here comes Kelly Bundy, here comes fucking that miniskirt, here comes this, and here comes Al Bundy. You know it. Or you're like, well, The Simpsons, fuck, it's such an iconic thing, but it all started out with these crude little Tracy Ullman endings for her show, and there are these little drawings that became that thing. So we go through the 90s, the X era, as we called it, into 189 fucking new millennium. We went into Aretha Franklin died.
Mm-hmm. Did we do that together, or was that by myself?
I think that was just you.
Yeah, that was one of those moments where I was sitting in the dark with a bottle, reminiscing on the fabric.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And she meant a lot.
We went into reality TV.
Mm-hmm.
Burt Reynolds died.
Yeah.
We went into cinematic television and cable, and that's kind of like where we left it, with these kind of like.
Well, that's when we had just ended, because I remember you were coming over. Well, wait a minute, was it? Because we were watching Game of Thrones. Last week we talked a little bit about how you never recorded at... Oh, no. Okay, that's right. We were recording at the Pasadena place. Okay, we'd never recorded at the Beverly spot. But I remember you were watching Game of Thrones with Leslie. I was watching Game of Thrones on my own. But we were really drawn in to this world that George R.R. Martin had created, and that HBO had realized, and it was just that ride of fascination, but also ultimate disappointment in the way a production could go out of control, lose its way. But it was also the look at AMC with Mad Men, which we didn't really talk about because neither of us had watched. Breaking Bad, which I had loved, but then Deadwood, which was the one that I had lost myself in. And what we were talking about is a new type of golden age of television where television was no longer restricted by the constraints of network television. It was almost like movies breaking away from the Hays Code. HBO had been a game changer, and with that, there was this rapid drift towards making darker, angrier, bloodier, and more sexual television. And you had greatness that was born out of that. For me, that is the golden age of television, or at least golden age within my lifetime. It's comparable to the resurgence of cinema in the 1990s for you. I think there was this period where you just started to see more honest and more straightforward storytelling that didn't shy away from difficult subject matter. I mean, Jesus Christ, you had The Wire for 5 seasons. If there wasn't a show that tackled race and the problems of the inner city, I don't think there's ever been a show that tackled it better than that one. And you still haven't seen it, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Got to make time. I don't know where you're going to find time in this life, but
Yeah, I know. I mean, that's the struggle.
That is the struggle.
That's the struggle. we went from that into, we looked at episode 194 was us looking at the Fahrenheit films of Michael Moore.
Mm-hmm.
So Fahrenheit 9/11 paired with Fahrenheit 11/9.
Yeah. He got lucky with the way that worked out. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So it.
I think that was when the reality hit for us on what a Trump presidency was going to be, because I think I remember going to see that movie, and it had been a long time since I had walked out of a movie that depressed and that disgusted with my fellow human beings and where we were. And I don't think I could really anticipate how bad it was going to be. I mean, if you had told me that the political and social and cultural world would become what it is today, I really would have told you that you were full of shit and there's just no possible way. Looking at it now, there's a part of me that can't believe I was as naive as all that, and that I had let my guard down to such a degree, because I'm a cynic. I'm a pessimist. None of this shit should surprise me, and yet it does. And Michael Moore's film, I think, was the first true. It was the first moment where I realized this is going to be a lot worse than I thought it was going to be, and I was right.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of, at this point it was 2018, so we had started to talk about Trump.
Mm-hmm.
Trump is 2015, 2016. We came from a place originally where it was like, how to look at Trump through this, and obviously when we're going to do at some point Back to the Future, and so we will look at Trump through that. You know what I mean? And like everyone understands that, and everyone can understand looking at Trump through a professional wrestling lens as the heel. He's the fucking, like, this villain, this $1 million man / fucking what Vince McMahon became / whatever else.
Yeah.
All of these characters, right? And then once you get into the Michael Moore level, it's kind of like, well, this is already also post Charlottesville and the Unite the Right rally, which was from the year before. And it just started to get darker and darker. And we had done the Errol Morris stuff, and Errol Morris was already like taking us to a fucking, with Rumsfeld and all, and Errol Morris was already dark as fuck.
Yeah.
And then to go from Michael Moore and we paired them like that, Fahrenheit 9/11, Fahrenheit 11/9, and now here we are, and there's still more of Trump that we're gonna fucking go through, because, like, obviously between 2018 and what we've recorded up until today, there's more actual Trump shit in our fucking archives. But as of, like,
he's a cancer all over the show. He's a cancer over the culture. So it's like there's no way to avoid him. There's no way to pretend that this bastard doesn't have a hold on the American culture and thus the world culture, and it affects everything. It affects our way of thinking. It affects the way we relate to each other. The last episode that we recorded was on the Wednesday before the debate. Here we are a week past that, and the country's in turmoil, and it's in an uproar about whether or not Joe Biden. I mean, it's exaggerated now from what it once was of Joe Biden being too old for the job and should step down. And I can remember in the 1980s when Ronald Reagan was considered too old to be the president. Mm-hmm. Oh my God, Biden's performance made Ronald Reagan at his worst look like a fucking teenager. It was embarrassing, and you You sent me a text that night. I had watched a little bit of the debate, but I didn't see the worst part of it. And I remember seeing it the next day going, the world is, it's going to be a fucked up 4 months. There's no way around this. This is bad. And, here we are.
I mean, and now we're at a place where the Supreme Court, just expanded the power of the executive. And this goes back to the Errol Morris stuff. This goes back to fucking like the Michael Moore stuff.
Well, it specifically goes back to the Earl Morris, the Rumsfeld documentary, The Unknown Known, but also one that we haven't talked about again, the Steve Bannon, American Dharma.
Well, yeah, we'll get there. Yeah. I mean, and we're also gonna get to the Cheney film, where
Vice.
They were working their asses off to expand the power of the executive, and so in Fahrenheit 9/11, like you get the 9/11 George W. Bush shit, and it's this. You know, all of those fears and all of those, the arguments that were made on the left, that are always fucking made on the left, where it's like, you have Bill Maher, Michael Moore, and you have this whole thing of like, well, do you vote the third party person, or do you vote the Democratic Party pick? And then it becomes the argument is like, well, you have to vote for the lesser of two evils, and then the counter argument is like, yeah, well, the Ralph Nader thing, which is like, well, the lesser of two evils is still evil. But then the counter to that is like, well, if we fucking divide our vote, they win.
Yeah,
and then you don't get the lesser of evil; you get the most evil of the evil. So. Don't be stupid. We have to do what we can.
Yeah.
And so it becomes...
Yeah.
Huh?
No, you were saying, go ahead. I'm sorry.
And so it becomes this thing. And so now this is where we see ourselves, where it's like, well, after the debate, the left-leaning news opinion outlets were freaking the fuck out. And they were saying, like, should Biden voluntarily release all his delegates, step aside, and let someone else, come in and fucking like what the talking heads kept saying and selling it as was mostly viewers who were left or center were saying about Trump, and this is what I kept hearing was that the quote is that they were saying that these voters were saying hell no to Trump, but they were saying oh no to Biden.
Yeah.
It was like this. Oh God! Like really? Like, and then of course the next day he comes out like with an audience and he was very fired up, and it's kind of like this is like. Was there redemption there? But in the back of your mind, it's kind of like, well, we're talking about history of TV. Let's go to the debate between JFK and Nixon.
Yeah. You don't go up there with flop sweat. That's what happens. Yeah.
Yeah. People who watched it on TV. I mean, yeah, sure. The radio people said Nixon won, but the TV people say that JFK won.
But what Van Jones said about this one was, if you were listening to that, is that...
yeah, we almost cried.
Well, yeah.
I did see that.
You saw that, where it was like Biden defended it cohesively and intelligently, but badly. Trump was just bulldozing, but lying the whole way through.
Of course.
So you have somebody who's, but nobody's going to take away from Donald Trump because that's seen as being strong. The fact that he doesn't make any fucking sense whatsoever doesn't matter to these people. They see a strong leader. He's not a strong leader. He's a fucking embarrassment. He's a blustering fool that has no business being on that stage. We should be ashamed of ourselves for electing him president. If he gets it again, oh my God! And
Well, I mean,
these movies have showed us.
At this point, if he gets it again, I mean, the Supreme Court said basically so long as his actions are within the realm of official acts as president, he has absolute immunity. So hypothetically, when the Trump side was making a case in terms of the, I think it was in terms of the hush money case, it was brought out like hypothetically, well, if you were to order you're telling me if you were to order SEAL Team 6 to take out a political enemy, like as president, that's he's immune. And his lawyer was like, well, first he would have to be impeached successfully and convicted in the impeachment in order to have legal action taken against him, blah, blah, blah. So now the Supreme Court has basically said, yes, Donald Trump or any president, including Joe Biden now, but any future president can take an action that is seen as official, which that would be one, and then because they are acting in their official capacity as president, they would be immune. Now, the right, and I know we're digressing a little bit, but we're going to move forward. The right is, the right is not worried. Notice, at no point, or if they have, send us the fucking article, send us the whatever, not some asshole on fucking Reddit, send us something that's coming out of Fox News or these propaganda machines of the Republican Party that is worried that now Biden has the power to become dictator, because that's how they would spin it.
Yeah.
They're not spinning that. The reason why they're not spinning it is because they're not concerned that the left or any Democrat would actually do that, because it's only in their interests to have Trump as their dictator. If they were really concerned about it, then they number one, the Supreme Court wouldn't have come to that conclusion. And second, you would have all of these fucking like Sean Hannity's and all these assholes saying like, I mean, imagine if it were Obama.
Oh.
They would say, well, now we're going to be some kind of like Congo dictatorship, and they would do all of that.
Yeah, there'd be no shame.
Yeah, there would be no shame. They would say that they would start comparing Obama to Idi Amin and all this like disgusting racist shit that they would do. They're not worried about it because they want their fucking blonde fucking artificial whatever dictator. That's what they want. So there have been developments since we fucking saw fucking Michael Moore and his Fahrenheit films. From there, we went into more dystopian entertainment with an episode which we called "No More Room in Hell." It was episode 195, and it was the Living Dead series of George Romero. One of my favorite series that we did.
Is that when we started doing Halloween themed episodes? Had we done the month? Had we done the Universal monsters at that point? Yeah.
We had done like the Devil, but I don't know if that was actually in October. But this is like this is when we started doing maybe when we started doing October Halloween shit. So it was like we went from there to look at the way Romero and it was interesting because Romero did basically zombie films the way we looked at TV, the history of TV. So every like decade was like this block of like cultural meaning and cultural kind of like references, and this kind of this chunk of time that represented something, even if it was artificial in the way that we were looking at it, the way I described when we were talking about Kurt Cobain, like, okay, now is this, reacts against that, react, to get a sense of linearity. You kind of have to do that in order to give yourself some kind of coherent view of history of like the movement of through time forward. He did that with Night of the Living Dead as a late 60s film. Dawn of the Dead as this late 70s consumer film. Day of the Dead, 80s, fucking military, Land of the Dead, and so on. And it goes into, the diary, and that's it was very relevant. Each was relevant to kind of like a piece of history and a piece of culture.
Well, that was the great thing about Romero, is that he took what was going on in the culture at that time, and he adapted it to he threw the zombie element into it and really looked at how culture would deal with, the culture of a time would deal with this type of danger. And that I think what made Romero different was that it might have been a gimmick in some sense, but it was a stylized gimmick that was done really well. Yeah, there's a gimmick element to it, but it's hard to ignore the power of the military-industrial complex, consumerism, social media, the class struggle, the civil rights struggle, and then ultimately bringing it back to tribal with one family against another in the last film, Survival of the Dead. He took different. I mean, based on those films alone, I think Romero could have told the same story 6 or 7 more different ways. Shit, if he had survived, maybe he would be doing Politics of the Dead. I don't know, man. I mean,
which fucking zombie do we
exactly? Yeah, and wouldn't that be appropriate at this time? I mean, that's where we're at. I mean, the great horror filmmakers, which Romero is probably the lead, followed by Cronenberg, Carpenter, the granddaddies, James Whale and Lon Chaney, those guys, they were making social commentary. The films were not simply wowing you with gore and effect. They were talking about true paranoia, fears, dangers, but more importantly, how we as a culture react and either come together, but more often than not, destroy ourselves in our attempt to save the individual. That's what I find fascinating about his films, and I think I didn't like Day of the Dead, and I didn't like Survival of the Dead. But watching Survival of the Dead again, I realized how much better that film was than I had initially given it credit for. Day of the Dead I have to go back to. But I don't think there's a filmmaker working today or in the past who was ever able to take one subject and interpret it so many different ways, always making a different commentary on society as successfully or as insightfully as George Romero did. I think the man was amazing.
I mean, that's as cultural a critic as the way I took your take on it for Carlin. I mean, and then you have people who are actually cultural critics who are actually getting into the realm of philosophy and people like Mark Fisher, who's another unfortunately person who took his own life, but he has a book called Capitalist Realism, and he describes capital as a zombie, and that's obviously without Romero there would be no and look, and we're all in part of that system, and like let's not say, well, I don't want to get into like whether oh, you're a fucking Marxist and all that. We get on here and ask you guys to give us money. Like we're not, we don't have any illusions about that. You know what I mean? Like so the point is though that he describes it as a zombie maker, as saying that basically capital, going from the Marxist critique of what that system does, even though knowing that there probably is no alternative to it at this point, that the flesh that it converts into dead labor is our own flesh, and and I'm paraphrasing, and that we are the very zombies that capital makes. That capital is a zombie maker, but we are the zombies that it creates. And to have now someone who is in the intellectual realm critiquing culture at a higher, more nuanced, deeper level, critiquing culture, the economic system, the world order, but using the language informed by cinema, by popular cultural cinema, which is itself underlying that was a cultural critique. That's a big deal. Like, we need to acknowledge that it's like the idea of capitalism as a vampire. Okay, yeah, we get that, and that goes to Bram Stoker and all that. To say something is this Frankenstein's monster, that can go.
I lost you there.
Universal.
You said the Frankenstein's monster, that could go to what?
That can go. Obviously, it goes to Mary Shelley, but at the same time, our cultural understanding of it is filtered through the Universal horror films, and so just as those were critiques of whatever they were critiquing at the time, like horror and cinema is in the same way that sci-fi and some of these genre films or genre ghettos or whatever or neighborhoods of cinema, whatever you want to call them, they also have their role. And so we went through Romero, Cronenberg, where we looked at Rabid, The Brood, Shivers. We went into newer, at that time, horror films. The Witch, Hereditary, The Babadook. And of course, Robert Eggers has Nosferatu coming out, his version. Ari Aster is still out there. We went into Michael Myers' The Return. That was 2018. A return to Haddonfield. And that's crazy because at that point, that's a fucking, 40-year.
A 40-year return to, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the thing about it is that what it really shows you that is that everything is really cyclical, because the foundation is or the pillars are: we like to laugh, we like to cry, we like to be scared, and film can capture all of those things. It can scare the shit out of us. It can make us sad and longing, and it can make us laugh hysterically. It can reinforce something. Horror movies, and we did point out, horror movies both make us laugh and scare the shit out of us at the same time. because there is something about the excitement of being afraid. There's something about the it makes you laugh. It makes you laugh at yourself for forgetting that it's just a movie. You know, it gets into your psyche when and you see the sometimes the tropes of it. Somebody's going to jump out from the blackness, from the darkness. A body's going to fall. Somebody is already dead. That dog is barking at something, and no matter how many times we do it, we're always on board to. We're always on board for the scares. You know? Yeah. So
We you did episodes on Can You Forgive Me, or Melissa McCarthy film.
Very good film. If you haven't seen it, it's a really well made film with a great performances by both Melissa McCarthy and Richard E. Grant. You should see it.
You did It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, the 55th anniversary.
Yeah.
We continued Horror of Cronenberg with Scanners, The Dead Zone, and Videodrome.
Yeah.
And I mean, The Dead Zone, there are relevant elements there. There's Videodrome. I mean, that's episode 201.
Yeah.
Listen to that for a critique of like mass media, and that goes into like Marshall McLuhan type of shit. Very much influenced by that. Very obvious about its use of that. The way that media affects us, the way that the medium is the message, and now fucking like TikTok and all that shit in the handheld, and that's the message. You know what I mean? And what does that say about the way we receive information, the way that and how the symbiotic relationship between ourselves and that machine, where it's like, Kafka has Metamorphosis has a character wake up in bed as a bug. Like pretty soon you're gonna go to bed holding your fucking cell phone, and you're gonna wake up as the fucking cell phone. And
inside
like, is that
of it,
what we want?
Yeah.
So yeah. So it's just crazy. But episode 202 was Ricky J. We talked about the death of different celebrity deaths. I think at that point it was like Stan Lee and others, but including Ricky J. So we went back to that Deceptive Practices documentary that you had done before with a lot of alcohol and a lot of ice.
A lot of hours. It was
yeah.
That was a weird thing because none of it made sense. It was because it was 3 films. It was Terry Gilliam's Lost in La Mancha. I think it was a Jodorowsky Dune. I think I talked about that as well.
That was
And then I talked about Deceptive Practices. Yeah.
Yeah. Then you went to Be or Not to Be. You went back onto the shelves.
Yeah, the Lubitsch.
Talk about that. We did Psycho. We did both versions of Psycho in episode 204. So we looked at Hitchcock's version and the Van Zandt kind of like basically experiment. Which is like how to.
Yeah. You know what's weird about that? I don't remember watching the Van Zandt film. I know we watched it. We had to have watched it for the episode, but I cannot remember that film. I remember certain scenes of that film, and I remember how much I didn't particularly care for it. And I saw that they did a couple of things differently, but the shot by shot, I mean, it really says something about Hitchcock's film, is that Hitchcock's film is so good that the second film doesn't even register. It doesn't register in my memory, having seen it at all. I don't Like I said, I had to have seen it. I just don't remember seeing it. Do you? And that rarely happens with the movie and me.
I know I've seen it, and because I can picture elements of it, but it becomes going back to last week's conversation or whatever it was that we were talking about Kurt Cobain or any of these artists. You can get AI to do a rendition of what it thinks. A new song by that group to approximate. But it becomes ultimately kind of like, I mean, there are good cover bands and there are cover bands, you know? Or it's like that, which I'm getting ahead of myself, but I think that's that Yesterday movie where the idea is that if a guy were to get in an accident, he wakes up in the hospital and then somehow he's a musician and somehow he realizes that he lives in a world where the Beatles don't exist, but he still remembers them. And now he's like, well, come on, the Beatles. And they're like, what are you talking about? And then he's like, well, yesterday. Like, and they're like, what do you mean? And then he starts playing some chords and they're like, that's amazing. Like, he's like, they're like, well, did you write that? He's like, no, I'm fucking like, no, this is the Beatles. And they're like, what are you talking about? And then he becomes famous playing this music. And it's obviously not the same. It's like Van Zandt. If anything, it's an experiment. It's like, what would have happened if I were to remake fucking Psycho shot for shot, but obviously I'm going to use different actors and I'm going to do this and that, but I'm going to do a shot for shot version. What is that like? Yeah, it's exactly what it sounds like.
Yeah.
And okay. It's just not the same. You know, Psycho is that first kiss. Psycho is that the beginning. And it has something that you cannot reproduce. From there, you did the Ballad of Buster Scruggs. Scruggs. That was
that movie. And you know what? That's the thing. We've never really done the Coen Brothers. I don't know how we've been doing this shit for 10 years, and we've never done the Coen Brothers.
There's a lot of shit that we haven't done.
Yeah, well,
you know, I mean, it just becomes one of those things, and it's like, it's when and where and how. It's crazy. So that put us into that ended 2018. We started 2019 with Reservoir Dogs and City on Fire. So Tarantino's version of the Ringo Lam film, and to kind of really compare those and to really look at how, like, what's the difference between that, and not necessarily that we didn't necessarily, we may have brought this into it, but like now that we just talked about Van Zandt doing Hitchcock, what's the difference between that? You know, going back to the cover thing, it's like, well, when Led Zeppelin stole the blues, they did it differently than Willie Dixon or whatever, you know, like in the same way that Hendrix or whoever else, or when Robert Johnson would do a fucking traditional song that, because they didn't only play blues, they played everything. If he would play some traditional song, whether on the street corner cutting heads or in some fucking in some bar, in some juke joint, you know, obviously they're going to put their own spin on it. Or you have Charlie Patton has a gravelly voice, and he's going to do that. So when Tarantino does City on Fire and it becomes Reservoir Dogs, it's a different thing, but you may still have moments where it's like, oh, this is a shot for shot fucking thing, or this is this, or so we really did that to look at the similarities and differences between these films, and to give us more perspective on Tarantino as that kind of, you know, whether it's Stravinsky or Picasso or whoever says that, you know, amateurs create or whatever, but artists steal, or, you know, amateurs borrow, true artists steal, whatever. If that's the case, then Tarantino is an artist.
But it was at a point in the show when we might have had personal reservations about Quentin Tarantino. At least I know I did. But the more we delved into it, the more we started talking to it, we started drifting further and further into our attitudes about his work. Never at any moment saying that he wasn't a good filmmaker. Only that his filmmaking wasn't as unique and refreshing as a lot of people had imagined that it was, or had given it attributed to it.
I think his early stuff still is unique and refreshing, including all the theft, because no one stole it like he did.
Yeah,
that's pretty unique.
But I think you're talking about 3 films before it became completely out of hand. I mean, you could say what you want about Pulp Fiction, and I think Pulp Fiction is a great film, but there are elements of Pulp Fiction where he just blatantly recreates. He's a DJ at that point. He's Puff Daddy. He's just laying down a beat and singing over it.
Let's not do a Puff Daddy thing on him. Let's not
drag him into this.
Point.
No.
Yeah.
But it would become gratuitous like Kill Bill.
At that point.
Yeah.
He's sampling.
Mm-hmm.
And I've said this before, there's a difference if you fucking say, hey, look, like, yeah, I'm sampling this. I think there's an understanding with someone like, let's say, like Moby.
Mm-hmm.
And also Moby is using a lot of shit that's like fucking public domain shit or whatever. But you know that this is like a fucking sample, and you're like, that's fucking okay. That's kind of cool. That's interesting what he did there. He took this old spiritual and put a beat on it. Okay. And there's something different than that. And there's also something different from when fucking Ice-T mixes fucking Led Zeppelin When the Levee Breaks, mm-hmm. and fucking Black Sabbath, and then raps on top of it. But you can look at the album and you can see like, oh, this is Black Sabbath, and that's fucking cool, because mm-hmm. He's doing it in a different way.
Yeah.
Those two things are different than when you have no concept. I mean, Led Zeppelin, originally that you didn't know that fucking like, if you didn't know that that they didn't write those songs.
Well, there's a difference in reimagining and reinterpreting it and putting a different spin on it. I never felt that Tarantino did that. I just felt that Tarantino was a movie fan, loved the way something looked on screen, and wanted to replicate it as close to possible with as to how it was done, but with a different actor. And to me, that's not, you know.
I argue with you because,
mm-hmm.
like, I don't. Did you see those films and you said this is a ripoff of that right away, or did you learn that later?
With some of them, I did. With Kill Bill, definitely, I knew he was stealing. With
Pulp Fiction, I knew. I'm talking about the early shit.
I didn't know with Reservoir, but I knew it with Pulp. I had already seen the setup. I had already seen parts of La Dolce Vita. I had seen the
8.5 dance and all that.
Yeah, I'd seen a lot of all that. There were, but it was more like an overall feeling for what was trying to go on screen that didn't feel innovative or new to me. It was kind of like, wait a minute, I've seen this before. I know he's doing something, and I've seen it, but I don't remember where it's coming from. And it would be the ensuing years where I'd be like, oh yeah, okay, I remember this shot. When I would go back to those movies, when I would start going back into noir, and I would be like, oh fuck yeah, that's where he stole this. That's where he got that from. That's where he did this. There was a moment, a good friend of mine and I were watching a Charles Bronson Italian-made film set in Italy, and we were watching this scene, and Telly Savalas is a mob boss, a crime boss in Italy, and he's wearing a silk. He's wearing like a silk smoking jacket, but he's drinking a drink out of a full pineapple with a straw. And my friend looked at me and said, I bet you anything, if Quentin Tarantino sees that, he's going to use it in a movie. Mm-hmm. And this is no shit. Tarantino was in that theater. We saw him later on. You got a big fucking head. You can tell it's Tarantino. You got a big Frankenstein head. He really, and I got a giant head, but this motherfucker has a giant head. And then I think 2 years later we saw Django, and sure enough, Leonardo DiCaprio was drinking some kind of a cocktail out of a fucking, not a pineapple. It was a coconut. It was a coconut. That's right. And I was like, fuck. Yeah. I was there. I saw it. You know, so I mean, that's just one example. I mean, that's one example of me being there for the thievery. I saw the thievery.
I wonder, it would be interesting to listen to the director's commentary. And if he were to get to that scene and he were to say, like, if he were to say, mm-hmm. that was actually you know where I stole that? You know where mm-hmm. I was inspired? I saw this comes from this.
Yeah.
And to really go into it and to elaborate on it and to fucking own it. And it would be more interesting to see. I heard some fucking asshole in the audience say that had I fucking seen this, it would be in a movie. And so I said, you know what? Fuck you. I am going to do it.
Yeah.
That would even be more interesting. But I mean, that's what he does. You know what I mean? And I think I think it's one of those fine lines where it's kind of like,
yeah.
You put fucking Led Zeppelin beat over a fucking Black Sabbath. You put a Black Sabbath riff over a Led Zeppelin beat, and then you rap on top of it. I'm not gonna fucking I'm not gonna say that that's fucking. I'm not gonna shit on you for that. I'm gonna say that that's fucking the shit.
Yeah, but I would argue that Ice-T. Yeah, but I would argue that Ice-T has shown on numerous occasions that his beats are, in a lot of times, original. His rhymes are very much of the very fact that he's using new rhymes and mixing these two beats, taking elements of one song and an element of another song. He's not karaokeing it. And I think that's the difference. And I think that's the thing that starts to raise its head each time we talk about Tarantino.
Well, it's one of those things.
Yeah. Well, looking at it just reinforces. Yeah.
There's a difference between doing a shot-for-shot fucking cover and doing something. City on Fire is different from Reservoir Dogs. Even if there are scenes in it that are fucking, like, very much taken from it.
Yeah.
So it's good, bad, or ugly. Whether you fucking love it, hate it, leave it, indifferent, whatever. That's Tarantino's fucking stamp, and so that's where we are with that.
That's the thing, is that I enjoy the films.
Yeah,
it's really a matter of how you cut this, how thinly you slice that meat, because it's like, yeah, I enjoy his films, and to this day, I enjoy his films. But I do not recognize him as the great artist, the great filmmaker, the great cultural, the great cultural presence that a Spielberg, a Coppola, a Scorsese, Paul Schrader. I don't see him in that vein, which is opposed to a lot of other people who do see him because they're not exposed to the breadth and the breadth of cinema.
There's also, I think, had he stayed to more of those like superficial jack moves, as we say, like maybe he would be, because it would be like if his whole career were based on that, or if he was actually, maybe he would have stronger films. I think his earlier films are stronger, and I think the editing also goes into that. We've talked about all that. We'll talk about it later, but it's. I think there's an early Tarantino and there's a late Tarantino, and the late Tarantino doesn't have the power or the freshness, whatever level of freshness that was, that it was when it first came out. It's kind of, and maybe that has, maybe that has to do with the internet. I've talked about that. Like early on, when you couldn't see these other clips, it fucking like, he was the internet because he was throwing all this random shit together at you.
But in the same vein, maybe we would appreciate Quentin, and I think we would appreciate Quentin Tarantino a hell of a lot more than we do if we didn't have to listen to him talk about the movies. He's horrible in interviews. I mean, he's annoying in interviews. That's what it is. He's annoying.
He's still an annoying person, so that's something else. But yeah,
like Fiona Apple. Did you ever hear the story of Fiona Apple when she was dating Paul Thomas Anderson?
No.
She said that she spent a night with Paul Thomas Anderson and Quentin Tarantino when they were both coked out of their minds talking about movies, and she wouldn't wish that on her worst enemy.
I believe that.
Yeah.
I can see that, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that really says a lot about both of them. Although Paul Thomas Anderson, I think, is a hell of a lot more subdued. So
from there we went into episode 207. So that's when we went into Vice and W. So we were really talking about the Bush, Cheney, Rumsfeld, view their White House time and their view of the powers of the executive. So we're seeing still elements of that now.
Well, the world was a changing place, and it was becoming. Films reflect that. Films, the old question is: does film influence culture, or is it influenced by culture? And it's both. Film reports on it, and with something like Vice, and and it's how much of that shit is true, and how much of it is entertainment. We've said this a lot on this show. You can't go to movies, especially popular movies, looking for the answers to historical and social problems. You can look to them to inform it, or you can look to them to inform your opinions. But if you're looking for answers, you're shit out of luck, because by nature of what film is, not even film, but storytelling, you're going to exaggerate, you're going to edit, and editing means leaving out certain aspects, whether or not those things are important. So Vice is a film that you can commend on the performance and the dedication that Christian Bale gives to the performance, but how accurate is it? And how much can you look at either W or Vice and say, that helps me, that gives me a clear understanding of the politics of both George W. Bush and Dick Cheney. I think if you're looking at it from that perspective, you're woefully naive.
And in today's climate, like, both of those men look utterly subdued, and
there's that aspect too. Yeah,
there's fucking like Liz Cheney, the daughter. Where before we were like, fuck, this is the worst, right? Obviously, it's not the worst, because we've seen the 20th century saw the worst, or it saw some, it saw the modern worst, but it was bad. And now you have Liz Cheney, this fucking arch conservative that under normal circumstances, you would say, fuck her and her policies.
Yeah.
Those of us where we lean, right? And fucking Trump and his people are calling for Liz Cheney to be fucking tried in these military tribunals.
It's fucking insane. But that goes back to the old adage and the old, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So you find yourself making an alliance with Liz Cheney of all people, and longing for the days of a George W. Bush. Wow.
Good old Guantanamo. And it's like, God damn. Military tribunals. It's that Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times.
Yeah.
And so from there you did an episode of The Zen Diaries of Gary Shandling and Kurosawa's Ikiru.
Did I do those films together?
Redemption. Yeah, you did.
Wow. I can see the correlation, but it's kind of crazy. Ikiru was a film that I wanted to...
Mixtape. That was your...
My what?
I said that was your mixtape. That was your fucking Black Sabbath riff over Led Zeppelin beat.
Ikiru is definitely one that I want to go back to with you, because I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's a fascinating film. It's one of the great films of...
What's on the cover of it?
It's an old man sitting on a swing in the snow.
On a swing?
Yeah.
I may have seen that. I'd have to watch it.
Oh, you ain't never seen it. Shut the fuck up. You ain't never seen it. There's no way you would forget that movie. I know. No, there's a chance you've seen it. I don't know.
I'm telling you. I don't know. I know the cover, so I may have seen that one. I have to see.
That says a lot, though, because it's like, think about something like that. Just seeing the poster, the cover, being a kid, going through Tower Records to the warehouse and seeing that on the thing, and there's something about that image. And you didn't even know who Takashi Shimoda was at that point, probably, but it was something that stuck with you, because that's the power of the image. An old man in a hat, sitting in the snow on a swing. Why is he there? There's got to be a story behind that.
Yeah.
And the story is beautiful. Yeah. It's one of the great films. It's one of the greatest films ever made. We've talked about in the past. When you talk about Kurosawa, you leave Seven Samurai out of the picture because it's just not fair to any other movie. High and Low was a film that I chose for us to watch. You loved it. I was really thrilled that you loved that movie. But Ikiru is a testament to... I remember seeing it as a kid, and it fit into the old man stuff. But seeing it as an old man, it carries... it carries weight like you wouldn't believe. Either see it now or wait another couple of years and see it when you're 50, because it's a film that it's gonna hit you. It's gonna hit you hard, and it's gonna make you think about life and purpose. And I think that's what...
As if I'm not thinking about those things now.
You're thinking about all that shit now. But when you can see it manifested on screen, and you can see... I think it normalizes certain things where you ask yourself, am I wasting my time at my job? The difference between you and me and them is that you and I are fully aware of how much time we're wasting on the job. But the necessity of it. The thing about it also is, how often do we forget that we're wasting time? There are times, and I told you this when I was living in LA, it would be a Thursday, and I kind of thought it was a Tuesday. And I didn't know what the fuck happened to the days. Like, I couldn't tell you what happened the day before, because it was so similar to every other day. That shit would depress the fuck out of me. 9 Inch Nails, every day is exactly the same. Yeah. I
get pissed off on Friday because Monday's around the corner.
Yeah. I hate a 3-day weekend because I know I have to go back to a job that's going to be worse after being happy for an extended period of time. It's fucking hard. Please see Akiru. We'll watch it and we'll talk about it next year.
I saw it already. Anyway, so
okay.
I could have seen it. I don't remember. I know the cover. I don't know if I don't know what the story is about.
That's what
so
makes
I don't
me
know.
Maybe it's ego on my part. But
I think it probably is.
It might be, but
Kurosawa belongs to you.
Kurosawa belongs to the world, but I really believe that if you had seen that movie, you wouldn't say, I don't remember what it's about. That movie would stay with you. There are certain movies that are like that.
I don't remember Dreams. I don't remember every segment of Dreams, and I know I've seen that. Kagemusha, I've seen, I don't remember exactly what that's about.
Neither of those two films are as important as this one. Neither of those two films resonate like this one. Casablanca, you would never forget that film. I don't think it's too important.
I think I've seen it. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Moving on. So, episode 209.
Yeah.
Roma and Bicycle Thieves. So, Roma being the Cuarón film, Bicycle Thief or Bicycle Thieves being the Sica film that takes place in Rome. Roma takes place in the Roma or Rome district of Mexico City. It was basically a look at neorealism from late 40s neorealism to a contemporary neorealistic film. That was interesting.
I didn't like the film, and I fell more. And it was a weird situation where I didn't like the film for personal political reasons, and I fell more in love with Bicycle Thieves. But you know what's weird? It's Bicycle Thieves, and there are certain films like this that set up a template for everything else that comes after it. There's a film from an Iranian filmmaker, I think. I think it's Iranian. Maybe it's Pakistani. I don't know. But it's called Man Push Cart. And as I watched
Is that a Kurosawa film? Or?
That might be a Kurosawa. I think that might be the director. It's incredible. I loved it.
Someone if it's him, he's someone that I've been wanting to get more into.
We need to sit down and watch. I mean, it's a starting off point. It might be a good film to start off.
It's not him. It's different.
No. It's a recent film within the last 6 or 7 years, but I remember I saw it about 6 months ago. I watched it late night. I was just pulling something off the shelf. I was like, I haven't seen this. Let me watch it. And a lot of the story parallels Bicycle Thieves, but it's very different in a lot of other aspects. And I fell in love with the film and fell deeper in love with De Sica's film. Now that we bring up the fact that the episode was Roma and that film, I don't know why we would have paired those two films except for the neorealism aspect of it.
I think that's exactly what it was.
Is that what it was? But it was really something that I just did not like Cuarón's film. And I really do like Cuarón as a filmmaker. I've liked his other stuff. I hated that film.
You felt that it didn't give the character, because it's basically an autobiographical take on Cuarón growing up in a middle class, like petit bourgeois section of Mexico City with an indigenous
housekeeper,
brown Mexican housekeeper. And so he made this film from the perspective of himself, basically. But the film centers around this woman, and you felt that she didn't really get a voice.
Yeah. I stand by that.
Film.
Yeah.
And my argument was that if he was going to make that film, it was going to be the same either way, because either he does it the way he did it, which seems like it's from his perspective, even though it's about her and it follows her. That's one, you can critique that, which is the critique you made, or you can say, well, okay, he gives her this voice or whatever, but he's the one that's still ultimately giving her the voice, because it's autobiographical, so it's not really her voice anyway, because he's imposing his perspective on her. So either way, he makes this movie, he's fucked, because he's going to get critiqued on it regardless.
Yeah, but, I watched Killers of the Flower Moon the other night, and I can level a very similar criticism to that film. But the way in which the story was handled was so much better. And maybe that's just a better filmmaker, or a story that is better. The navigation of the story itself is handled more done so in such a way as to get the true vibe of it.
I think it's similar.
It's very similar. I mean, you could make a case against Scorsese, DiCaprio, and De Niro as a means of appropriation of a story. But the final product, I think, speaks volumes to what happened in a way that Roma doesn't. I think there's a lot to be said for execution. And that's a film that could easily have the same criticism leveled at it, which I'd be willing to level at it, but ultimately works. So I'd have to watch Roma again in order to really solidify my problems with it. And who knows, maybe I'd like it this time. I don't know.
I don't think so.
Probably
I think
not.
This shit's pretty solid. Yeah,
I don't
think so. So from there we went to Cape Fear, both versions, 62 and 91 version.
Great time watching those.
Yeah, so it was it's what you talked about earlier, rather, in this episode of the previous one. So to see those two versions and it kind of speaks to what we were talking about. It's like the difference between a remake, reboot, a fucking like a shot for shot. Obviously, this is different. Two different takes. Same thing. Moving on to episode 211, Infernal Affairs versus The Departed. So we were touching on that, on these ideas of remakes and similar things, and from there we went into we did an episode that was Goodbye to a Few Friends, and we did a brief Oscar recap. Then we did the NPAA and the ratings board.
That was a lot of fun.
An episode on that, yeah. This film is not yet rated. That just shows how crazy that aspect of the industry is. And that took us into a history of the Oscars. And so we did multiple episodes on that.
We must have done about 12 episodes, right? From the 1920s till the 2010s, right? 11, 12 episodes?
Yeah, we went.
Wow.
We went. I don't know if it was exactly 12.
We did a lot.
No, I think it was 6 episodes.
No, we did more than that.
No, it was more because we had a break, and then we did about fucking at least 9 or 10 episodes.
I think so.
So we just went through these periods, and we played the game of like who won, who did Rick think won, why would they have won, what came out, who were they against, the politics, the self-congratulatory aspect of it.
The politics.
what each of those periods of time meant for the studio in terms of like the you know the for example, part 4 was the blockbuster era regaining control. So from 75 to 83, kind of we've seen that. So it was a way of looking at, again, the cultural background around each of these periods.
Well,
and now,
sorry.
Now, not only the films, but like also the interpretation of the films and the industry interpreting itself and seeing like, how do we, going into if it's a slavery film, how do we look at this? How do we award ourselves for looking at it? All of that.
I think it's one of the best things about movie watching is that it's not simply about the enjoyment of watching a movie. It's if you really love movies, it's about examining how the films themselves speak to the culture and the time. The culture and the times, who we are as a people, how we grow, what are our problems? What kind of problems do we have with each other, as well as I think one of the film exists as a document to who we are, and it speaks to our fears, our desires, our passions. And when you can look back on that decades later, it gives you a sense of who we were. It helps you understand your parents better. It helps you understand where you are now and how you've gotten there. And I think that's one of the driving things. It's certainly one of the aspects of my movie watching that I embrace and that I love the most about the entire experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's what we're doing. It's what we did and what we're doing is to look back, to really connect back with all of this shit.
Yeah. But that's I think it was just I wouldn't say it was a whim to go back into the Oscars, but I think it was really interesting to look at what was embraced and to see what was awarded and why, and to speculate on why it was, why 1939 was supposedly the greatest year in films, what brought about the 70s, and why Rocky would beat Taxi Driver or a couple of the other films of that year, how Spielberg could be nominated, how Jaws could be nominated in so many categories and Spielberg be ignored, but also how the business itself, the corporations, would respond to the changing face. And it's weird because the awards are kind of like them pushing us to like a certain thing. And we would do that. We would do those 10 or 11 episodes, however many episodes we did. But then we did about 11 outside. Yeah. But then we would go on, which is an episode which is what we're going to talk about in the next episode probably, and we would talk about the films that defined those decades, which I think is a more telling idea, because
those two don't necessarily line up.
They rarely line up. I think one of the things that we found in the look at the Oscar nominees and the Oscar winners was how often they got it wrong, and how often those films Best Picture winners did not stand the test of time. That they were not films that would last. They oftentimes ignored performances that were, I just read that Jenna Rollins is suffering from Alzheimer's disease right now at the age of like 94. And I can't help but think about that performance. I can't help but think of A Woman Under the Influence. And like I've said on this show, I can't recommend it. I can't recommend that film to the majority of people I know because I don't know of too many people who are prepared to watch a movie like that. That movie is so fucking naked and so painful. I don't know how you can watch her and not be emotionally just beaten by what she does on that film. The same with Harvey Keitel in Bad Lieutenant. I've talked about that. At least Jenna Rollins was nominated. Keitel wasn't. And we're talking about two of the greatest performances I've ever seen on film.
Yeah.
What was a lot of fun about it was it kind of forced our hand. It definitely forced my hand in understanding what is considered great, what is considered mediocre, and what is just bad. Plus, it gave us a chance to really look at the changing face of cinema.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah.
The cast, the change, and the step outside of last time we talked about this whole process of podcasting about film is for each of us to try to like get out of our own heads, and then when we get feedback or interactions from the audience or recommendations, is to like get a different perspective, obviously, but to try to step out of our own snobbish film geek perspective, and to say, well, whatever that is, that the Academy, right? These people that are part of this thing, that are in there, what do they think deserves these little awards? Which I'm saying these little awards, but these are like, this is a huge, if someone wins an Oscar, it's a big deal.
Yeah.
And what do they feel deserves this, and why? Why would they feel that? How the fuck? But then it becomes, again, the politics, and it doesn't only mean that we say politics, it's not only the vying for that position, but there's also the element of like, well, Schindler's List or films like it are going to win because of the way that Hollywood is and or wants to be seen. What do they value? What kind of films do they value, or what kind of films do they want to represent themselves as valuing? So if it's a fucking slavery film, it's probably it's gonna get some attention.
Mm-hmm.
If it has to, and this is kind of like what draws the critique of right wingers, is it's kind of like this kind of, going all the way back to like the bleeding heart liberal type of shit. There's that. If it has to do with some kind of issue, some kind of cultural issue that needs to have characters represent that, and to be able to see those people triumph, issues of like, obviously, like cultural representation in film where people don't get to see people that look like them. That's a thing too, where it's like, well, how come, the question is like, people ask, how come all my heroes are white? And how come the fucking, the criminals look like me, or whatever, and why do I like Clint Eastwood? When Clint Eastwood wouldn't like me, you know what I mean? Like,
on screen,
whatever.
Yeah.
On or off.
We don't know.
Let's not get too.
I don't want to. Yeah. You're right.
I'm not saying he's racist. I'm just saying that, like, fucking, politically, he is where he is.
Yeah.
So to see all of that and to really kind of wrestle with that and play with that, and at the same time, when you're looking at these things and you're saying, yeah, I get it, like representation, all of these things do mean something, but then to also see the flip side of that, where it's like, yeah, but at what point does this also become a form of exploitation when it's kind of like glad handing?
Exploitation and pandering.
And pandering, and making oneself appear to be more aware, or more, it almost can become a kind of weaponized wokeness. And now I sound like a fucking asshole right winger fucking podcaster.
Yeah.
But what I mean by that is that, like, there's the wokeness of the original forms of being aware of fucking, like, actual racism that exists in the world. And yes, it does exist. And there are elements to it that, yes, they are structural. They are systemic. There's a difference between that and saying, well, I want to wear the cloak of wokeness in order to gain a certain reputation, or in order to, so I can get more professional opportunities from a certain group of people. In the same way that the opposite side is, I'm going to accuse someone of being woke, and in that accusation, I'm adding all this other bullshit so that right-wingers can fucking take my argument and jump on it. Other, like, more prominent right-wingers, and that way I can gain some kind of right-wing cachet. And I can use that as this dog whistle where I can load it with as much bullshit as possible. And now woke means whatever you want it to mean, but it just means bad, according to the right. So it's very much, the Oscars become it's not just at this point an award ceremony. It becomes the playing out, in the same way that we see these cultural conversations happening on screen. Now it's the playing out and acting out of these cultural dramas on stage, and personal ones too, Will Smith, but also political ones with Marlon Brando fucking saying, no, I want to use this opportunity to mention the plight of Native Americans. And then John Wayne is trying to go fucking, like, attack somebody, attack the female representative of Marlon Brando, she's indigenous, and he wants to fucking, he's ready to fucking
beat her
take
ass.
his wagon and go fucking, yeah. You know, like, she's not wearing a yellow ribbon, you know, like, and so that series was basically one of several embodiments of what we continue to do. So it's like these kind of series is a big, broad, like, looking at time and looking at film and TV historically. And then that's what we're doing here, is now looking at film and TV historically through the look of our own looking at film and theater historically.
Well, that's
so
the
it's
fascinating,
becoming a meta process.
Well, that's the fascinating aspect, is that we go into a thing thinking we know it. And the more we discuss, the more we talk. The more I listen to you, the more you listen to me. But the more we listen to ourselves, you listening to you and me listening to me, we get a better understanding of everything that this means. That's the value that I put in this show, for me. I don't know what people take from listening to it, but for me, doing it reaffirms my beliefs, challenges my beliefs, and helps me understand why I believe certain things. I consider this show, this once a week thing that we do, one of the great gifts that has been given to me. Whoever gave that gift, I don't know. But it is a gift. It is an opportunity to indulge in the one thing that I know that I love that makes everything else, the 40-hour week, the family, the dog, all of it easier. I appreciate...
I agree. Easier, more meaningful, more enlightening.
Exactly. I appreciate your involvement with it. I appreciate the listeners' involvement with it. I appreciate that they come to us to donate. I appreciate the fact that they go to buymeacoffee.com/WatchRickRamos and they give what they can. Do not ever be mistaken and think that we don't appreciate that we don't love it. We do. It is a pleasure and a privilege to do this show. And I'm looking forward to the next, I don't know how many fucking episodes it's going to take for us to go through and get us to July of 2024. But I'm having a fun time with it.
Definitely. Thank you all. All of those who have donated, we're going to mention you by name. Mm-hmm. We always do. For now, though, it's all of you, the collective, the group, the audience, the listeners, whether you came on in the beginning, you're coming in now, you came on in 2017, 18, 19, where we're at in the series. Thank you. Stay tuned.
Bye-bye now.